If you've been watching some of my recent videos, you may have noticed two conversations I had with clients. Number one, with Ed Borrego, who built his business to success and continues to grow, earning $200,000 a month. And also with another one of my clients, Ruben Brooks, who built his business to success, earning over $150,000 a month, and both of them continuing to grow. During our conversations, we would always emphasize the importance of accepting the end and relating to what appears from the end. Anything that appears on the journey to actualizing that end is not seen as a failure, but is seen as somehow being in harmony and in contribution to that vision. See, we're the only ones imagining in relation to appearances. I remember many times while I was building my IT business back in the days, these certain experiences that I would have, which at the time, it was tempting to point to that experience and consider that a failure. Failure of a sales campaign, marketing campaign, or whatever in relation to the vision. I realized that, if I receive the inspiration to start this campaign, then some way, somehow, it is part of the story to actualizing the vision. And by that I mean, ideas, hunches, and inspirations are received within. So if I receive an inspiration within, God gives inspiration, then some way, somehow, it leads to the end. Now, there were times where I would identify with a imaginal act in relation to the appearance in which it would generate unnecessary friction or resistance. When the best thing to do is what Neville is saying here, is to be totally indifferent as to possible failure. So in that particular moment, I was not accepting the end. And no shame and condemnation. Simply remind myself by capturing the feeling of already being who I desire to be, already having what I desire. Capture the feeling, that's prayer. Then what happens is that particular experience changes. We all of a sudden find an optimization, or something changes in the sales or marketing campaign and it leads to success. We've discussed this in the conversation with Ruben and Ed. I'll link in the description to those videos. You'll see it in there. They talk about this. Now, as a result of those conversations, what was inspired from that also was I put together this program called Flow-Based Prosperity. And one of the things that we've been discussing in this group program that I put together, and if you want to know more about that, I'll also link in the description. So I'd like to discuss further the prayer chapter in the book, Feeling is the Secret, some of my insights in relation to reflecting upon conversations I had with Ed, Ruben, and also many that I've been working with through the program. And I trust that you'll find this to be very helpful. So before we discuss this, Colossians 1:27 states, "To them God willed to make known what are the riches of the glory of this mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory." See, this world that appears to the five senses is the Word that appears flesh. It appears by the Word, and nothing appears without the Word. John 1:1-3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. Thus, there's only God. Only God appears. Only God appears also to animate all that appears, including the individual that appears. There's a wonderful book called Abdullah, Teacher, Healer by Walter C. Lanyon. Some of my sources say it was the same Abdullah who mentored Neville Goddard. He was an Ethiopian Kabbalistic rabbi. So when I was reading this book, Abdullah, Teacher, Healer by Walter C. Lanyon, Abdullah says, "This is a glorious thought and one well worth sitting in the silence with. I and my Father are one. You have heard it for years, but when you ponder it anew with the thought that from the next thought I'm going to think God's thoughts, it will reveal in you a newness of life and purpose you have never known before. The still small voice, of which so much has been said, will finally become the only voice as you begin to realize your oneness with the Father within." So, what is the role of the individual that appears then, if there's only God? To experience creation that is already complete and done in the beginning. Exodus 3:14. "And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you." So the individual that appears is a child of God, children of Israel. Yet, while in the silence, the individual mind dissolves, and it is realized that truly there's only God. So how does then the individual call upon God to appear? By what they say of that I am. By disentangling our mind from the evidence of the senses and focusing our attention on thinking feelingly from an invisible state, mentally feeling it as the only reality. As one does that, they are, in that moment, totally indifferent as to possible failure. They have accepted the end. And if on the journey to actualizing the vision, they experience something and they imagine that, for whatever the reason may be, to be a failure, they can in that moment disentangle their mind from the evidence of the senses and refocus their attention on thinking feelingly from an invisible state, mentally feeling it as the only reality. And so to remain on the journey in a flow-based way, as I like to say it, I simply listen to that still small voice within. It is encouraged with everyone that I work with. I've been doing it for years, since I remember Steve Jobs said it in his commencement speech. He said, "Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice." See, what appears as others' opinions could be past beliefs identified with, past imaginal activity. If it appears, there's no shame and condemnation. Be still in that moment. It does not hold you back from actualizing your vision. This is a practice. Prayer is actually something that we do often. Although we might not call it prayer, we might call it autosuggestion, or we might call it what we're thinking feelingly of in relation to appearances. So as I brought up in last Sunday's Neville Goddard discussion, which I'll link to in the description, being grateful. Anytime a desire arises, I'm grateful. Desire means I have. That's prayer. As he said here in Feeling is the Secret. Prayer is not so much what you ask for as how you prepare for its reception. Then he quotes Mark 11:24 by saying, "Whatsoever things ye desire, when ye pray, believe that you have received them, and ye shall have them." It doesn't say look around to see others' opinions, which could be past imaginal activity playing out. It says, whatsoever things ye desire. Only God gives desires, fulfills desires, appears as and animates all that appears. Again, whatsoever things ye desire. When ye pray, believe that you have received them, as in you already have them. You already are that, as we go back in the beginning here. Call your desires into being. You call your desires into being by thinking feelingly from the premise of already having. Whatever it implies, I have a lavish, steady, dependable income, consistent with integrity and mutual benefit. But what if the senses appear to deny that? The senses don't appear to deny anything. We're the ones assigning meaning in relation to the senses. And as you accept the end, you think feelingly from already having it. You, in that moment, without trying to forcefully try to pretend like the world that is becoming is not appearing. You become inwardly indifferent as to possible failure. You've accepted the end. He says prayer is an illusion of sleep which diminishes the impression of the outer world and renders the mind more receptive to suggestion from within. We're the only ones suggesting how the one cause within appears and animates all that appears. And we do it through prayer, which is suggestion. What are we suggesting to ourselves in relation to appearances? And in relation to our desire, are we suggesting that we already have it? That's prayer. He says the mind in prayer is in a state of relaxation and receptivity akin to feeling attained just before dropping off to sleep. Prayer is not so much what you ask for as how you prepare for its reception. So, disentangle your mind from the evidence of the senses prior to sleep. And think feelingly from the premise of already having. Pray as though you already have it. What does that imply? I have a lavish, steady, dependable income consistent with integrity and mutual benefit. I have a wonderful, harmonious relationship. I have wonderful friends. Thank you. That's prayer. He says the only condition required is that you believe that your prayers are already realized. So, how do we meet that condition? By feeling that it has been realized, like that's the way it is. The way it was promised through desire. I see desires as promises of God. And only God gives desires and fulfills desires and appears as and animates all that appears to reflect what was accepted, which was the desire. You desire to be who you truly desire to be. Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Desire means you already have those things. The way you say it appears, as I said. John 1:1-3, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. He says, your prayer must be answered if you assume the feeling. Assume the feeling. What would the feeling be like if it were true? That's prayer. Assume the feeling that would be yours were you already in possession of your objective. Just capture the feeling. I already have it. What about in relation to appearances, where once we would interpret that as possible failure? Disentangle your mind from the evidence of the senses and accept that you already have it. Capture that feeling. Allow the emotions to be. Allow the world to be. Abide as the stillness. Again, go to the beginning, abide as the stillness, and then reimagine. And by that I mean John 1:1-3. In the beginning was the Word. Go to the beginning, the silence. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. He says, your prayer must be answered if you assume the feeling that will be yours were you already in possession of your objective. The moment you accept the wish as an accomplished fact, the subconscious finds means to its realization. Only God finds the means. What is impressed upon the subconscious mind, God takes that and externalizes it for you. The individual self that appears does not need to worry. The individual that appears is a child of God, children of Israel. Yet while in the silence, the individual mind dissolves and it is realized that only God exists beyond mind. And so how does God appear? By what we say of that I am. And if on the journey to actualizing the vision, there is inner resistance in relation to what appears, release the resistance. Let it be. There's no need to resist the resistance. Watch the video I released on Thursday, which you'll find to be very helpful when it comes to resistance. And why do we do this? Because that allows us to remain perfectly disciplined, as he says here. The perfectly disciplined are always in tune with the wish as an accomplished fact. They know that consciousness is the one and only reality, that ideas and feelings are facts of consciousness and are as real as objects in space. I love how he said that. Ideas and feelings are facts of consciousness and are as real as objects in space. So, if ideas and feelings are facts of consciousness and are as real as objects in space, how does one rearrange the objects in space or cause the objects in space to reappear the way they desire? Well, consciousness is the one and only reality. It is what we're thinking feelingly upon now that initiates the change for objects in space to rearrange, to reflect the change that has been initiated. I've seen this working with others many times. I've seen this in my personal relationships. A person appears a particular way. I'm having a relationship with the person in a particular way. It may be an undesirable experience. I let the world be. I simply reimagine the relationship the way I desire to be. Again, only God gives and fulfills desires and appears as all that has been animated. Then I know with certainty who I desire desires me. What I desire desires me as only God gives and fulfills desires. And sure enough, I accept that I already am that they already are who they desire to be. I already am who I desire to be. We already are the way we desire to be. And they change. The conversations change, the relationship change to reflect what I desire. I've seen this with my family, with my friends, in relationships, romantic relationships. We discussed this also in Thursday's video. I'll link in the description to it. In romantic relationships where it was tempting at one point to point to what Neville refers to as visible causes. There's no visible cause. There's only one cause, and it is within, I am. The world may appear to be a particular way to what is related to that one cause. And so we have the opportunity to practice this wherever we are. And I would consider this practice so it could be as flow-based as possible, as effortless as possible, as a joyous way of being. Simply accept that you have the ability to remain on course. It gets easier each day. Turn it into autosuggestion. More so each day, in every way. It is easier for me to accept my vision as reality. In relation to what appears on the journey to actualizing my vision, I relate to the experience in a harmonious way. I acknowledge that feelings and ideas are facts of consciousness and are as real as objects in space, yet are transformed by the word. And so, what do I say of that I am? He says, on the other hand, the undisciplined find it difficult to believe that which is denied by the senses, and usually accepts or rejects solely on appearances of the senses. So the way I relate to this is the senses don't actually deny. Who's the one that's assigning the meaning that the senses deny or accept? Who's the one? We are the only suggester within. That's what we're saying I am too. That's what I mean by we're often praying. So in relation to the senses, what are we praying? What are we saying of that I am? That I am that animates all, including the individual that appears or the individuals that appear. What are we saying of that I am? If identified with appearances, we disentangle our mind from the evidence of the senses, for it is the beliefs in mind that appears as reactivity as a result of being polarized by appearance, but actually the polarization is the result of what is identified with in mind. The mind is truly blank. We may place in mind whatever we accept as true. Beliefs are simply what was once accepted as true. If they're not in harmony with our being, we simply dissolve them by disentangling our mind from the evidence of the senses, acknowledging that our vision is reality. And as the idea and feeling of it being real, like that's the way it is accepted, the fact of consciousness, and is as real as the objects in space, yet it is the cause and substance for the phenomena of the objects in space. And thus, we simply allow the objects in space to rearrange to reflect that vision. And so the undisciplined, we could say, is the one that may have unknowingly identified with what is undesirable. And so they're relating that to what appears to the senses, and maybe forms a conclusion that it denies their vision. That is all imaginal activity. Release identification to that imaginal activity, and it does not appear that way. He says, because of this tendency to rely on the evidence of the senses, if one has the tendency to rely on the evidence of the senses, as if you've been applying this, what we've been discussing over the years with respect to Neville's information, you would have found that it is easier and easier to not rely on what appears as evidence of the senses, because we know it's past imaginal activity. And if it's desirable past imaginal activity, then so be it. If it's undesirable, I disentangle my mind from the evidence of the senses and think feelingly from the premise of already having, already being who I desire to be, already having what I desire. And that's prayer. Because as he says here very precisely, prayer is the art of assuming the feeling of being and having that which you want. So you want something, there's nothing wrong with you for wanting it. You desire something, there's nothing wrong with you for desiring. Only God gives what you want and fulfills what you want. Only God gives what you desire and fulfills what you desire. You desire to be who you truly desire to be. You desire to have what you truly desire to have. Do you acknowledge that you already are? True self is love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. God desires for you to experience that, and you know what that means to you. As Steve Jobs said, don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your inner voice, and very specifically in relation to our conversation. The opinions of others, past imaginal activity playing out. One does not need to be drowned out by past imaginal activity for others echo what we whisper in secret. Let them be. disentangle your mind from the evidence of the senses and reimagine it the way you desire it to be. And they appear that way. So prayer is the art of assuming the feeling of being and having that which you want. I already have. I already am. I'm being that now. I have that now. He also says, prayer is the art of yielding to the wish and not the forcing of the wish. When you acknowledge, anytime you desire something, you're already being it. Desire means having. Anytime you desire something that you want to experience, or have, you could say, you already are that. You dissolve unnecessary separation between the individual and God. The individual desires from the heart of reality, from which all arise from. That's God. He says prayers are to yielding to the wish and not to the forcing of the wish. To yield successfully to the wish as an accomplished fact, you must create a passive state, which is similar, as he says, to the feeling which precedes sleep, which is state akin to sleep. In such a relaxed state, the mind is turned from the objective world and easily senses the reality of the subjective state. Take a deep breath. You can do this wherever you are. You can certainly do it before going to sleep. I always recommend creating auto-suggestions, recording them, and playing them on loop prior to going to sleep. Yet you could do this wherever you are. In the moment, bring yourself into the stillness. Release the emotions. Allow them to be. Don't resist the resistance. Bring yourself into the stillness. Now is where all the power is. Now is where you have the opportunity to accept desire. Desire means already having. Desire means already being. Thank you. What would the feeling be like if it were true? Even if one experiences resistance to imagining what implies, if you capture the feeling of it being true, I can assure you, it starts to appear as the outer experiences of life. Wonderful relationships, wonderful friendships, wonderful life experiences, as reflections of that feeling. People start to appear saying certain things. And you know it was because you captured that feeling at one point. You accept it. I might not know what this looks like. I've captured the feeling of it being so. And what if you know what it looks like? What if you know who you desire to be with? What if you know what you desire to have or experience in life? Again, only God gives and fulfills desire. Think feelingly from the premise of already having. Enter into that scene. Imagine yourself already being who you desire to be from that scene. That's prayer. Many ways of praying, and thus many ways of applying Mark 11:24. Whatsoever things ye desire, when ye pray, believe that you have received them, and ye shall have them. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You could say, by capturing the feeling of being what I desire to have, of having what I desire to be, I accept, I am. That which I desire to be, that which I want to have, I am. Thus, by calling my desires into being, by imagining and feeling my wish fulfilled, I have accepted the end, allowing the world to rearrange to reflect the way I imagine it to be. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.